This is Otaku No Video, Episode 13, Tekkon Kinkreet. Alright, so let us talk about Tekkon Kinkreet, which we've all watched in the past couple of weeks. Eric, why don't you start?
Well, I watched it all of about an hour ago, so it's shockingly fresh in my mind right now. But I really, really liked it. I don't know what I was expecting from it. It wasn't that by any stretch of the imagination. That was a far more interesting visual experience than I was really expecting, and actually a lot more textured and interesting character work than I was expecting as well.
Yeah.
And in fact, the only thing that keeps me from raving up and down the walls about it is that I think it went off the rails a little bit in the last 20 minutes with the Deus Ex Minotaur at the end. That was sort of like I kind of felt like they were reaching for some kind of meaningful conclusion, and so that didn't quite work for me, the way that all played out.
And they kept reaching for 20 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it was a long time for what was really just a coda. And it was just that same anime-ish ending of, like, the bad guys are defeated, but is the darkness going to take you? You know, I've seen that, like, maybe 15 too many times. Yeah. So I would have liked something a little more subtle than that Minotaur thing, although the Minotaur fight sequence was incredibly cool. But so that didn't quite work for me, but everything else really did work for me. I was very impressed by it. I thought it was really cool. My only other complaint is that I think they should not have killed off the last Yakuza guy, the guy with the baby.
Oh yeah,
that was a cheap shot in my opinion.
Fair enough.
But other than that, I liked it.
What did you think of the color scheme?
I liked it. It was interesting. It was, like I said, visually it was really different than what I was expecting going in. It didn't really look like anime. It looked like the short sequences you see in like Gotham Knight or Animatrix. You know, that those are the kinds of thing, but it was taken out over an entire film. So I like the visual style and the color palette and the kind of flat looking animation a lot. I like that.
I had a bit of I don't want to call it a problem, but because I mean, typically in animation, or especially in anime, you'll have sort of watercolor backgrounds and sort of more flat characters, color-wise. And because Tekkon Kinkreet uses basically the same color scheme for both, the problem I had with that is that it made the characters sort of fade into the background. And I had a more difficult time following the action and seeing where the characters were on screen. I think that was intentional, and in a lot of ways I liked how that really made the characters feel more like they were part of their world. But it you know, for me, it detracted a bit from my ability to make sense of what was going on.
Interesting. It definitely was a much flatter world than you usually get out of animation. That did work for me, but it was everything was on the same plane in a lot of ways. That would definitely seem to be the style they were going for.
Yeah. Although that said, I mean, the environments were very realistic in their own way. I mean, I love just the texture of the world, how things would be run down or not run down, how to have this feel like it was very much like what Tokyo is really like, but sort of more fanciful, just with sort of almost like a fantasy, a Photoshop effect, you know, layered on top of it. But again, very real in some way.
Actually, ironically, I think that the director said that it was based off of Hong Kong.
Oh, interesting.
But I'm not. Don't quote me on that. But I'm pretty sure it was that.
No, I actually, when you mention that, I can see that actually. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it does have that kind of. And Hong Kong has always been a melting pot, so it does have that sort of melting pot feel. Also, it feels very Satoshi Kon to me. I don't know about you guys.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to broaden that out a little bit. I think it felt a lot more Western than a lot of anime does usually, which I think was good for it. And that Satoshi Kon, all on his own, tended to feel a little more Western, especially with something like Tokyo Godfathers. But overall, like, he has a more Western plot sense about a lot of his stuff, especially his early stuff. And I think this had that too, which, since it was, you know, adapted at least by Westerners.
Yeah, I agree, and it does have just sort of it's just not what we typically see from an anime film. And I found it, and I don't know about you all, but like the opening, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, probably is not, but the opening has a crow flying around and then cuts down to White wearing what looks very much like Lane's bear suit.
Uh-huh.
And I just saw Lane immediately in that, which I think, again, if he didn't intend it, at the very least, I mean, I thought that was a good reference into it, that this is sort of a disorienting kind of a story.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, have either one of you read the manga?
No.
Okay. I'd be interested to see how many shots are frame by frame.
Yeah, from what I could see from the documentary, which showed some bits from the manga, it looks like the manga is not followed that closely in the sense that, well, in the manga looks quite a bit more, I don't want to say stylized, but more sketchy, I guess. In the sense that it sort of, it zooms in on the characters a lot more. You don't see sort of where they are in relation to everything else quite as much. I don't know, but it's hard to tell. It's a good point.
But the other thing I think really worked for Tekkon Kinkreet that I liked was the feeling of the city and how well seated the story was in its world.
Yes.
And actually the thing that reminded me the most of was Blade Runner in that respect. That it created this like big, bold, lived in, realistic city that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And it has got to be one of the hardest things to do in film because people try it all the time and very rarely succeed or even come close to succeeding. And this just nailed it. The city was a real city to me, and it had to be for the story to work.
Absolutely. Well, in the documentary, they were saying that they actually had the overall map of the city, and they plotted out where everything was occurring in the city, so that when they were drawing backgrounds, you were actually seeing, like during the big fight sequence on top of the train, you were actually seeing, yes, there should be a river over that character's shoulder. And there should be that. I think that really added to the realism that, yes, they could say what would or wouldn't be in there. It's very subconscious, but it adds a lot to the realism.
Definitely. What did you think of it, Nick? I haven't heard what you thought yet.
I think the first half hour was very off-putting. I felt like the action sequence that was supposed to be really cool and trippy didn't feel like the whole in the traffic did not feel as intense as I wanted it to, and a lot of other things were just sort of, okay, you're being weird on purpose. That's nice. Please get to something that actually matters. But after that, it did a fair job. I'm not a fan of any of the combat in the entire film. It's not that it's bad. It's very mediocre. I don't like the. I think it's Black is the one who's really violent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He when he attacks the Yakuza guy from behind through the glass. Like, I kept waiting for him to swing. I don't know. It just felt really out of sync and sort of odd to me. But
see, I like that. It's interesting because I like that. I like the fact that the combat was not trying to be the Matrix. It was trying to be street fighting. It was trying to be, combat lasts for 15 seconds and then someone's laying in the pool of their own blood.
Yeah, but I don't know. I still felt like it wasn't, like it didn't even have that grittiness to it.
I'm kind of in the middle of you guys with the fight scenes. I actually agree with Nick in some ways that a lot, like